Hello, this is Karen Cook from the Home Modification Occupational Therapy Alliance, HMOTA. And today we have a special guest, Corey Staver, with us. Corey is part of the David Corey Company. He also runs an educational program called CHAMPS. And Corey's been doing home modifications for over 20 years, would you say, Corey?
Yes, yep, right about that, about 20 years.
Wonderful. So, Corey, how did you start? Tell us a little bit about your history and your journey to where you are right now.
Sure. So I went to Loma Linda University in Southern California, got my degree in occupational therapy. Before that, I had a degree from in business, and so I actually went into business for 2 years and hated it. But then I went back to school and got my degree in OT, and I worked at the medical center for a few years, and then I did upper extremity ortho, and then I kind of got into home health and skilled nursing as an independent practitioner, and contracted for several years in Southern California. My mom had gotten really sick. Heard she had about a year to live, and so in 30 days, my wife and two kids upped and moved to sunny northern Florida, and here we are, 23 years later, and mom's still doing well. And I actually think her and Mayo Clinic lied just to get us to move out there with her grandkids. But long story short, when I came out here, I didn't have my license activated in Florida yet. My stepfather was a very large contractor. He owned a company called Paul Davis Restoration and Remodeling, and they had about 300 to 350 franchises in the U.S. They had another 20 or 30 in Canada, and then they extended also into Australia and the UK as well. And so when I got back out here to Florida, I needed a job, and he had sold his business. He was starting a new one, and that business was, again, construction, but their primary focus was in the insurance restoration business. So what you did is if you had a kitchen fire, his company would go out and rebuild it. And they did that on a national level, and he had sold that, and now he's wanting to start this new program. And he asked me if I wanted to participate, and I thought feeding my family and was a good idea. So I jumped at the opportunity. He was very successful, and he actually became a very high-end mentor to me from a business perspective, a construction perspective, and a cultural perspective. So his world was in insurance, and it was property insurance. And for 3.5 years or so, I helped him build a program that would deal with that put together independent contractors, created some standardized processes, and then went back to market providing that collaborative group to the insurance industry. About 3.5 years into it, he walked in one day and said, "I'm retired, and I'm closing the business down." And so I was left with a kind of an empty hole. I'd gotten my license back activated as an OT in Florida. At that time, I wasn't sure I really wanted to continue in OT. I was a little concerned with some of the bureaucratic things that were going on, and when I was in private practice in California, what some of the management was trying to get us to do from billing perspectives, and I just didn't want to play in that world anymore. But I got a call one day from a company here in North Florida. They have since been sold again, but they called and they said, "Hey, Corey, do you still have your contractor program together? We work for this company that does all these things in workers' comp. Basically, if anything when someone's discharged home, they provide services. So anything from, DME, pharmaceutical goods, attendant care, everything that's included in it. It was an all-encompassing world of this company." And they said, "And we also do home mods, and we don't know what we're doing, and we could certainly use some help. We're looking to contract with someone to do those home mods." And it was kind of for such a time as this. When I graduated with my first degree in business, I didn't really enjoy it for 2 years, and so I got out of it. I got the OT degree, and I enjoyed what I was doing there, but after a number of years, I got a little burnout on some of the what happens behind closed doors things. And then I'm working for my stepdad building a contractor program, and he shuts that down. And I was at a point in life where I was really frustrated. And then all of a sudden I get this phone call, and and all those worlds collided. All the things that I had done in my life to that point, I was pretty frustrated with. But then all this happened, and I realized all of it comes together for such a time as this. And I ended up, I said, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do this for you. And I hung up the phone and realized I had absolutely no idea of any kind what I had just agreed to do. So I blindly stepped into it. And for about 3 years, I found that I learned exactly what not to do in the workers' comp market. So the best education I ever got in home mods, I thought I knew a little bit because I'd done home health and I had helped establish, some accessible environments and during that practice, but it was never full-blown, full-time home modifications. And so 3 years in the workers' comp market, working for these network services companies, taught me a lot about the industry, which I really had to learn because it's such a niche. Taught me about how business is commonly done in the industry, helped me to understand what the challenges and problems were that they were facing. And so for 3 years, I really failed. I mean, we did miserable. I was financially broke. I kept doing some OT on the side, independent things, just so I could pay the bills. But it was in a pretty bad place. I actually started a business in my parents' laundry room because I couldn't afford an office or space. So for those 3 years, it was probably the three toughest years of my life. And one day, I was about to walk away from it because it was so challenging. I was going to dinner one night, and actually our pastor's wife came to me and said, "How's the business going?" I said, "Really bad. I'm at a place where it's not viable anymore, and I don't know that I have enough business that I can actually keep it open. I really need to go get a job, feed my family, pay my bills." She goes, "Well, I think you need to hang on to it for a couple more weeks." She goes, "I really think sometimes when you're passionate about it, if you really think there's a good business model, sometimes we quit just before things break." And so I told her I would wait for 2 more weeks. And about a week later, about a week into that 2 weeks, I happened to be involved with a project that had gone really, really bad. And I wasn't in the current relationships I had with our clients. I wasn't allowed to talk to the insurance company or the adjuster. There's a wall that's put between you and the primary insurance carrier. And so, but this one had gone so bad that I really needed to talk with them directly. So I had talked the company in that I was working with to let me hold a conference call similar to this one on GoToMeeting and have that direct conversation. And we did, and it went really well. I didn't put my name on there. I didn't put my logo on there. I made sure I represented our client, the network company, as best I could. But regardless, about an hour later, I got a phone call, and it was one of the national providers, national top 5 insurance carriers in the country. They said, "Hey, we were on the call, and we'd like to invite you to come up and spend some time with us and help us and talk about our policies and procedures internally on how we handle our home mods," which was my breakthrough moment. So at that point, that was the first time I had ever talked in 3 years. I had ever talked to a carrier directly. And about a month later, and I wasn't even sure how I'd pay for the airfare to get up there, but about a month later, I found myself in Hartford, Connecticut, sitting on about the 18th floor in a conference room, and I thought I was going to go talk to one person, and the doors swing open, and I am there with about 15 of the major case directors for this national insurance company, and I was so out of place. But I sat and listened, and what I found was that they knew even less than I did about home modifications, what happens in the field, design, all of those things. And it really opened my eyes to what the industry needed. And so that was my breakthrough moment. And after a short period of time, I left. Actually, I was there for about 3 hours. I was escorted down the elevator. And my host said, "Well, that went well. Thanks for coming." And I left. And I was like, well, that didn't make sense to me at all. About a week later, I get a phone call, and I was offered one of 2 national contracts with this company to handle their home modifications on a national basis. That was my turning point and my breakthrough. It took me about 3.5 years to get there. It took a lot of school of hard knocks, but That happened about 17, 16 years ago. And fortunately, they didn't give me a lot of business at first. It took a little while to build. But we're at a point, the David Corey Company, which is our home modifications housing solutions side, we do about, on a good year, close to 400 homes a year across the country. On a slow year, we're somewhere around 250, but 250 homes, and that's all over the country. And it's little over probably 60% of our assignments are considered in the catastrophic realm, where people have had significant major injuries, and the modifications are pretty significant as well. So again, all of it is in workers' comp, and it's brought us to where we are today. And so that's my history. Maybe it's elongated a little bit. Maybe I took too much time there, but certainly
No.
that's how I started, and where I ended up, and kind of where we are today.
So when you say you handle the home modifications, as we know, there's a lot to it as far as, the initial evaluation till the final training the people and,
Correct.
your home setup. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the process that you go through with the?
Sure. So basically, we have a model that over the years we've developed, because it's not going to be too different than probably your own. But within the comp, there's certain guidelines that we have to follow. But more specifically, I believe that every home modification project that's ever been done goes through the same three basic phases. Phase one being the assessment, which is really all about developing the scope of work. Number two is the estimating process, which is controlling the cost and coming up with what would be considered a reasonable amount for the work that's being done. And then phase three is the management of the project. So from the time the hammer hits the nail to the time it's completed, that's phase three, and that includes, of course, the contracts and everything else that go into it. So every home modification project kind of goes through those same basic phases. Whether even if it was simply a grab bar, I tell our carriers when we're working with them or when I'm speaking that when I talk about those same three phases, they'll often say, "Well, there was never a home assessment done," and I always say, "Yeah, there was. It might have been just you sitting at a desk thinking, this person might need a grab bar." Technically, that's an assessment. It's not a formal one like we would typically go out and do, but someone had to look at the situation, assess that there might be a need, determine what that need would be, and then have the work done if it was agreed to. So it's pretty much those same three phases. And what we do internally is we break out each one of those phases independently, and we have a system for each one. So the system, and each one of them is independent of each other. So if a carrier wants to hire our company to just do an assessment, or just to work on pricing, or just to do project management, they can, or they can do all of them at one, what we would call a level 3 assignment, which says we basically want you to take care of it from beginning to end. And so each of those phases are independent of each other, but they're also very dependent on each other. You really can't get an appropriate price unless you have an appropriate scope. And you can't manage the project unless you actually know what the first two things are as well. So they're dependent on each other, but they can also be independent of each other.
Do you find that when with the workman's comp industry, for instance, I work in auto predominantly, and in the auto world, if you want to do a home modification, especially a complex home modification for someone who's been catastrophically injured, but also sometimes even the more simple ones for short-term injuries, they require an occupational therapy home evaluation. They will not accept one from a case manager or a physical therapist. How do you find that goes in the workman's comp world?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so, the work that I've done in either auto or liability is handled similar but different, and the outcomes are similar but different. It seems like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that's more your world. But when I've been involved with any kind of liability type based claim, it seemed like to me it was whatever the market will bear. It's whatever they can argue, whatever they can negotiate, and it's a much more broad stroke of what is deemed acceptable recommended modifications. I did one in I believe it was in Maine. It was an auto accident, and they ended up, it's quite broad, but they ended up modifying the home, the lake house, a dock. I mean, it was very expansive because it was negotiated that way. In comp, there's a very fine line. Everything has to be deemed medically necessary, and then how that's determined is pretty unique because home modifications are considered a medical benefit in the workers' comp arena. So what the same type of guidelines that you would have to go through to get a medical treatment, a surgery, a rehab, or something like that, the same criteria that authorizes treatment is the same criteria that has to authorize the modifications. So we have to follow certain guidelines, and we have to be able to justify what we do within those guidelines. But and you know what? I think I'm going around about it. Remind me of your question again. There, I was chasing a squirrel.
No worries. I was asking about OTs, but it brings me to another point.
You want me to answer that real quick? Because I think it's a great question. So, no, you don't have to be an OT in workers' comp. There's no, I was talking to the North Carolina Educational Conference, and I said, you know, the funny thing is about it is that I have a son who's 16. My son could wake up in the morning, go to Staples, print business cards, and on it say accessibility specialist. He could then turn around and market himself as an accessibility specialist without any background experience or anything in any way. Excuse me, and I guarantee you he could get some business before long. Just because he has that notion. He pretended to be something. And unfortunately, I think in workers' comp, there is no guideline, there is no standard, there's nothing that says, you know, I know personally, I would tell you probably the majority of assessments that are done are probably done by contractors themselves. And I've always felt that that's kind of like letting a fox guard the hen house. There's a way, you know, there's always a way to expand the scope of work, and whether they know anything about a disability or a diagnosis or disease progression, most of them do not. But in comp, there is no standard that says an OT has to do it. We're trying to change that through our training program, through our CHAMP educational program. We're trying to change that to where we have this accessibility training. The majority of the accessibility specialists who are going to that are therapists. But the majority of the people who are in attendance are contractors who are just trying to understand the market. It's pretty important that if you're going to be in a market like comp, that you fully understand the rules, regulations, who the players are, not just how to build your business, but how to be successful in it. And so while that started out to be a certification for contractors, it's expanded to OTs as well who want to do business in our market. But yeah, so no, there is no, you don't have to be an OT. Let me say one thing on that, expand. On the flip side of that, the perception is in the industry, call an OT out to do an assessment. So you'll hear if they really want a full-blown assessment, a formal one, they'll send an OT out. But what they typically do will pick up the phone and reach out to a rehab facility and say, send an OT out to go do an assessment. And what you get, and I don't want to bash any therapists who are out there doing assessments, or if it's not your core competency, it's my opinion is that you probably shouldn't be doing it. If you're into pediatric OT in a facility or a home health, and then someone says, can you do an assessment? And you say, yeah, I can. It's a significantly different animal that you're dealing with than maybe what your core competency is within our profession. So my personal opinion is, if you're going to accept the responsibility of doing a skilled home assessment, you better get yourself in place as far as understanding what that really means, because it's a pretty serious deal, and there's a lot of money and there's a lot of risk factors involved if it's not done correct. And I've been on the butt end of some bad things over the years, and so it's just understand what you're getting yourself into. By the way, most contractors don't want to do an assessment; they just want to be told what to do. The good ones do, in my opinion. So it behooves you very well for contractors to ally themselves closely with a good OT slash accessibility specialist.
I agree. So one thing I find, like in auto, we kind of write a goal at the beginning when we first start the evaluation. What is the
Mm-hmm.
goal? It's to get back to their former lifestyle as much as possible. And
Sure.
so we were able to say, okay, what were you doing before the accident? How can we set things up so you can live to that lifestyle as much as possible after the accident?
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
then we do recommend things like altering wheelchairs if they're outside a lot, even like hunting apparatus to go on the wheelchairs, wheelchair cleaning stations, a deck on the back so that they can get out of the house and, be outside as well as inside. Um, but I'm finding in the workman's comp world those recommendations don't always go as well as they do in the auto world. So the emotional and psychosocial rehab seems to not be there so much. What would you say as far as that goes?
Yeah, you're
And
right. so, so what I'll and I get it. I kind of understand both sides of it. So in workers' comp, everything has to be deemed medically necessary. So the term necessary is is the key word. Reason they say reasonable, but what it really comes down to, things that are litigated is it necessary? And everything in comp that's awarded has to be number one, directly related to the injury. Number two, it has to be consistent with common methods of practice. And so remember, I'm talking about the medical side. So they're not going to provide some state-of-the-art treatment that's being done overseas. It's got to be something that's reasonable and customary within that type of treatment. Number three, it can't be based solely on the individual's injured worker's convenience. And it's so everything has to be tied to the medical capacity or the functional capacity of that injured worker. So when we look at that, you mentioned having an objective when you start an assignment, and I think that's absolutely appropriate, and it should be. I don't think we blindly go into it. I think what you have to do is really set some parameters and criteria. Yours, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like it's kind of a blanket. I want to get you back to where you were before. That's kind of the concept of indemnification. In workers' comp, indemnification usually has a financial application to it. So I want to make you whole again. So on the indemnity side, that means that you're getting a percentage of your salary that you've now lost. So you're getting made whole as far as financially. But we also talk about being made whole physically. And while we can't regrow a limb or we can't make your spine heal itself, what can we do to get you back to a level of functioning pre-injury? But the reality is there are some people who will never get there. So the way we teach it is there's like a continuum and maybe going left to right. And on the left side, it's about provision of care, and on the right side, it's about functional independence. And the objective is to make sure that there is an outcome that's met for every single modification that's recommended. It needs to be supported by an outcome objective. Now, that outcome objective for someone who is a C4 quad, ventilator dependent or whatever, it means that I'm never going to have them functionally independent. It's not going to happen. The carrier is going to provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week attendant care. So for me to modify a kitchen it would absolutely be inappropriate because you have attendant care who's going to provide that for them. So the objective is, at the end of the day, what is truly an outcome objective with doing anything in the kitchen? Well, it's nutrition, it's dietary. So if the meals are being provided for them, then the objective is met. If we modify a kitchen and they can prepare meals for themselves, it's met, and then the carrier doesn't have to pay for attendant care. There's always that offset. So having an established outcome objective, by the way, is spot on. In comp, though, we don't get into, very seldom do we get into, and this is going to sound bad, and let me show you the other side of the coin for a minute. For as long as I've been doing comp in 20 years, I've never once seen any policy written or any judgment provided that ever talked about quality of life. It's never a primary determining factor in a recommended modification. So you mentioned being able to get out in the backyard because of the psychosocial effect of it being nice and being able to look at my view on my upper deck. There are many times that's not provided because it's not medically necessary. There's not a medical or functional reason to get them outside. That being said, so just when it sounds like comp's a horrific place to work because they don't care about the person's well-being or quality of life, and while I say it's never a primary determining factor, every modification that's ever been done improves your quality of life. If I can get you into the house, if I can get you into a bathroom, if I can get you under a sink, if I can get you in and out of your car, if I can help you to do all these things again, that absolutely improves your quality of life in each of those areas. That being said, if it's not tied to a medical or functional, very specific medical or functional reason, carriers are usually not going to authorize providing you access to your dock so you can get in your boat. It's more or less, I need to get you in and out of your house safely. I've seen some pretty remarkable modifications done. I probably 2 or 3 times a year we're building houses for people that the carrier is paying for. So right when we kind of hear the bad things about comp, it's pretty remarkable the things that they're doing. I used to tell some clients that I was working with one time, was actually an injured worker who was really complaining about comp. I said, imagine what would happen if you got injured while you were not working. All of this would have been left up to your well-being and figuring out how to get it done. But what's happening now is you're getting a livable, accessible home where you can be as independent as possible. All your needs are going to be provided, and that's the truth. So yeah, to kind of go the long way around your question, there are some significant differences between auto and other kinds of liability and then workers' comp.
Thank you. Yeah, that was something I was really interested in because I just got some pushback on a recommendation for a deck in a wheelchair cleaning station, and it was just like, this is
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
so,
Yeah, and I
thank-
get that. So so from the deck, I get it. Unless there's a transition, and that becomes your second egress. That's kind of what I look at. There's creative ways to do it. It depends. And of course, I don't know that particular situation. And it'd be fun to do a call like this and actually talk through a case study on a comp claim. But for instance, we had one where someone said, like, my mom really likes to be out in her rose garden. A rose garden's like 30 feet from the back of the house, and there's no way a carrier is going to let me build a sidewalk or not an egress, but a sidewalk so she can get out in the rose garden and sit in the afternoons. That would be, I think, enormously beneficial in many ways, but it's not a medical necessity. That being said, I know I need to usually provide a secondary egress, and I need to get that egress away from the home. So instead of wrapping it around the house, we just simply did the destination point in the middle of a rose garden. So our outcome objective is a secondary egress. It gets her away from the house for safety reasons. The destination point, it doesn't matter where it is. So we didn't do it to get her in the rose garden. We did it as a secondary egress. It just happened to be it ends in the middle of the rose garden. I always share with the carrier that that's what we're doing, and that's the primary reason is the egress. Secondary reason is because that's where she wants to be. So sometimes you be creative about how you go about doing it, and a lot of the times it's provided.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. The particular company that we've been doing these workman's comp evaluations, we haven't been doing a ton, but we just pretty much fill out an app, and so we're not able to, like, for.
You say you just fill out an app?
Yeah, and it just doesn't work very well. I'm just.
No.
But it is.
By the way, what's interesting, Karen, is with that, I've always been a believer that, we have over the last 20 years, we've been in a fortunate position where, and you probably are as well, that we can turn down business if it doesn't align with our corporate values and my particular belief. We've kind of walked away from some pretty major companies because I thought that the understanding and what we were being asked to do was simply do what they wanted rather than to do what was right. So, that's always a business decision that you have to make when you're facing certain things. But yeah, I haven't been working with an insurance company that's required us to use an app. I have seen where some of the large network services companies are going in that direction. That's
Yeah,
a little too much, control for me.
industry a little bit more. And I think that we've got some sway over how it will be done. But right now,
Good.
they've got us using that, and I feel like, yeah, it doesn't really cover what needs to be covered.
No, it doesn't. No. I believe that. I believe, things like software and any system. You can't. In our world in comp, there's so many regulations. Like there's so many pricing regulations, and there's so many other things. But the home mods don't fit any of those. And a lot of times the industry tries to shove our square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't work. So what I tell people is you can't standardize home modifications. Now you can standardize how it's done. You can create a system that establishes timeline standards and the way it's presented and how you go about it, but you can't necessarily standardize what is provided. Because like you said earlier, I forget the statement you said that once you've seen one, you've seen one kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So we've always been a proponent of standardizing the way things are done and putting some controls in place, but not necessarily just because one quad is a quad doesn't mean another quad gets the same thing. It may completely different. So yeah, it's hard to just fill out a form and make it work.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work. I just feel like we need to be able to justify medically what we're doing, not just make
Yep.
recommendations in
Yeah,
order to
absolutely.
buy the client. So that's one thing that we're kind of going back and forth on, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yep, sure.
So, so tell me about the CHAMPS program.
Yeah, so CHAMP stands for Certified Home Assessment and Modification Professional. So probably, man, once our business model changed from going from the network companies and working directly with carriers, which is all we do. We don't work with any like third-party network companies. 100% of our business is working directly with a carrier. We also work with some third-party administrators, but it's primarily directly with the person who controls the claim. But what early on was happening is I knew we needed some good general contractors to work with. And we had some really good ones. Many of them initially were because of my relationship with my stepdad and his franchises around the country. But what I found was they could build great buildings and structurally they were great. They really had no idea what was going on in the comp world. And so where we got in trouble is we would send a contractor out and the contractor would say, no, what you really need is X. Or, you know what, I think that's great what they're doing, but I think you probably also need A, B, and C. And in the workers' comp world, that's a death nail in your coffin that basically says, the carriers authorized A, B, and C, but the contractor's out there saying we also need to do D, E, and F. And as soon as that homeowner, injured worker hears that, they feel they're entitled to all these other things that are really not appropriate whatsoever. So we even had accessibility contractors who were doing large volumes of ADA kind of work and universal design work and
Yeah.
home. Yeah, we had a lot of those who could do good work, but once we put them in the comp world and began to assign them claims, it got them and us in trouble many times. So CHAMP was developed as a result of the need to help our contractors be more successful in the workers' comp world. So originally it was online, and that was a complete nightmare. And then we started moving into a live conference where you sit and work through it, which really has been the best model so far. We're probably going to split that up a little bit, do some coursework online, and the rest of it will be a 2 or 3 day intensive. But the whole purpose of it was to take contractors who were interested in doing home modifications in the workers' comp world and teaching them all about workers' comp. If you're going to be in it, you might as well know more about it. So day one is really all about theory, culture, workers' comp. What are the benefits in workers' comp? Who are the players? what does a comp case manager do? What does an adjuster do? What do the claim handlers do? What are the different types of companies you'll work with? Um, what's workers' comp litigation? And then it's how do you understand medical necessity within the industry? How do you fully understand what disability means? And so we kind of get into those things on day one. Day two, it's all about our common diagnosis. So the three most common diagnoses in workers' comp: spinal cord, brain injury, and then chronic pain a lot of times, but it's spinal cord, brain injury, and then amputations. And those are the three most common. And then there's a whole plethora of others that kind of smatter in there. And so we get into more details. So it's important when a contractor goes out. I don't expect them to create an assessment. I don't expect them to understand the world of someone who is a quad or a para. But what I do want them to do is understand the importance of why we do what we do. So on that day, too, when we get into each of those more common diagnoses, we'll a lot of times we'll bring someone who's gone through, who has that injury or who's wheelchair dependent, have them come in, talk about what goes through their day. What's their common, how do they do bowel and bladder routines? How do they transfer in out of beds? We show lots of videos. I want them to feel it, not just think it, but I want them to understand how important it is. Why when we do a design and we put something where we put it, it's important that they don't mess with it unless there's a structural issue that's going on that for some reason we're not going to be able to make that happen. And that doesn't happen that often. But when there is, we utilize it. But I want them to fully understand what's going on within those diagnoses. And then we get into a little later on the second day, we get into what are the three phases, and we'll start getting into the assessment process. And then the day three, we really get into communications, documentations, field practice guidelines, what the expectations are from the carrier review. And then the end of that day, we kind of get into marketing. How do you build your business in workers' comp? How do you really understand who the players are and what their needs are, and how can you have access to that and position yourself within the workers' comp arena? So it was all originally designed for contractors, and then it expanded to some OTs who we were actually training to bring on and work with us as independent contractors as well. And I needed the OTs to understand the comp world. And then we started having carriers interested. So we have TPAs and case managers and adjusters go through the program now as well. So that became our CHAMP certification. And what that's rolling into now is what we call CHAMP Connect. And what was happening is we were having early on, we'd have a contractor come through the course, and then they'd say, well, I didn't get any business. Because the expectation was if they came to a David Corey company, because we require our contractors to go through it or we won't work with them. And so they would come to it and they'd say, well, we didn't get any more business. And I said, well, if I don't have any assignments that are coming in your area, you're not going to. But that being said, it's like you teach a man to fish. You feed them for a lifetime. I tell them, what have you done with it? You've gone through the course. We've given you this information. I've given you the names and numbers of all my competitors. Go work for them too. Go out there. And they kept, we had more and more come back and say, well, we still have it. So I said, what Champ Connect is we started building a website and a community of people who've gone through the course and that are certified in workers' comp. So by the way, the Champ certification course is the only certification course that is specifically designed for the workers' comp industry. There's CAPS, there's the courses that are going out by USC, there's School of Fall Prevention. You have the CEAC and all these others, and they're more about aging in place. But what our program has been is specifically about workers' comp. And so we're the only certification program that is, if you're going to work in comp, it's specifically about that. So we looked at it, and I said, well, okay, I only have X number of claims I'm passing out, and if we don't have one in your area, we don't have one. What can we do now to help you get more business in your area? So we developed a community, and we are actually we're putting that out to carriers, our competitors, everybody who says, I want you to, I want to do more business. and we say, fine, we're going to introduce you to everybody. We're not going to even make anything on it. I'm just going to introduce you to other people, and then we're going to let other people, other carriers who don't want to work with us personally or have our involvement, we want them to go directly to it. So our whole purpose is to help them. Oh, that's a different CHAMPS, Certified Health Association. Oh, yeah, that's not us. But it's all about connecting good CHAMP certified contractors with the directly with the people who are, we call them service seekers and service providers, is connecting those two. And so that's kind of what the whole CHAMP certification. And we're going into our fourth year of having an annual conference. That's different from the certification program, where we're bringing the people who've gone through the course back together to meet, communicate, do roundtables. And so they actually last year sit around a table with carriers, accessibility specialists, contractors, case managers, and everyone sits around there and has meaningful conversations about, contractors have issues with carriers have contractors with issues, contractors have issues with carriers, but they never talk. So we wanted to bring them together, have open and direct conversations so that they can build programs that work better for everybody. That's been really cool. That's where a lot of our push has been lately.
Yeah, I really feel like that's exciting, and that's a pivot I would not have expected. It seems like you're giving away the store.
I am giving away the store. So a number of years ago, it's kind of interesting. A number of years ago, my brother is a professional motivational speaker and an executive coach, and he's well known. He's written a couple of books, and he's pretty well known in the business world. He said to me about 5 years ago, he said, Corey, you're hoarding everything. You're keeping it in. And he said, we're in a world today that everything is available online anyway. He said the people who are going to be successful are the ones that give it away. And when he didn't mean give away your business, but he said give away your knowledge. Knowledge is something that it's going to be something that is not just good for you, but good for everybody. And I walked away. My stepdad, who owned the construction business, when he started that business in the 60s, the construction world and the property insurance industry was very fragmented. There was no systems or anything in place. It was just poorly done. And he came in and was the first one to create a system for construction in that world. And as a result, over the years, not only did he build a great business, but he changed the way business was done. And I told him that he died. He was 92. He died a few months back. And several times over the years, I told him, Paul, one day when I die or when I retire or when I ride off in the sunset or whatever I do, if I can look back and feel that I had the same kind of influence in our industry as you did on yours, I would feel really good about it. And it's not about necessarily building my business at this point. It's about helping an industry understand that there's a better way. He used to say, don't do things better than your competitors. Instead, do things differently than your competitors to get a better result. And that really stuck with me really hard. So over the years, as we've been building our programs, we've been trying to establish things that can be applied by other people that actually improve the industry. And so our CHAMP is our way of pushing that out there and helping people do that. So, not our CHAMP, giving the farm away in essence, yes, but I'm not really, because in many ways that drives business back to us. Because, if an insurance company wants to find a contractor or an accessibility specialist in, let's say, Atlanta, Georgia, but they don't want to manage it, they don't want to have anything to do, they can either, what we call is CHAMP Direct, which means they can go directly to them and we don't have anything to do with it, or they can do what's called CHAMP Assist. And CHAMP Assist says, yeah, that's great. We see you have a good contractor there. You've got an accessibility specialist, but we don't want to do anything about it. We want you to take care of the whole thing. We have a fee structure built in for that piece of it. I figure probably 40% of what will be done as this develops is going to go direct, and that's fine. If I can help my contractors and the therapists we work with become successful, then that's great. On the flip side, know that there's a lot of, after being in the business for 20 years, there's very few insurance companies that want to take care of all that themselves, and they really want to defer the risk. So they'll turn around and they'll assign it through the CHAMP Assist program, which says, we'll take care of that internally for you and manage the process from beginning to end. So it's just a way of helping people build their business, allow our providers and our service seekers meet each other in the middle and actually work directly together. And then we're like a big dating service. And then if you want us to go on that date with you and make sure everything's up and up, we'll be glad to do that for you. And that's going to, it's going to be very much web-based and systems-based. We have a pretty robust file management program that's being developed now as well. So if someone wants to assign a claim to Karen, then there's a hub in the middle that everyone can communicate with and manage that claim with, and it becomes we have, and Karen, maybe you've seen this on some of my material, we use the term trans-collaborative, and it's a term that I invented. Go ahead.
I have seen that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a funny term, and I invented that. I kind of came up with that a few years ago because we were sitting in a meeting and we were joking around. I said our three core principles are being transparent, collaborative, and cooperative. And I said, yeah, we're trans-collaborative. And I thought, okay, we need to write that down and use that, because everything that, as we're building, and anyone who hears this or who are really interested in establishing a business model, I will tell you there's some great occupational therapists that do great work, but there's not many that I've met who are really competent in building a business and a brand. And that's a whole nother program. There's, by the way, and this is a shameless plug, there's a book called E-Myth. It stands for the entrepreneurial myth. I'd highly recommend anyone who wants to go into business, read that as you go into it or before you go into it. It's a great book. Yeah, but anyway, the trans-collaborative is a culture, and in our industry, it doesn't exist. So we're trying to push that. The transparency says everything that the carrier gives us is theirs. So when they assign us a claim, it's 100% theirs. There's never a hidden agenda. There's never a hidden markup. It's 100% open from beginning to end of it. If I am in the DME area and I sell the insurance company a wheelchair, I let them know what we bought it from the manufacturer for. They know specifically every penny goes. That's 100, and that does not happen in our industry. Our industry is shrouded in secrecy and walls, and it's 100% about gigantic markups, and nobody wants to let anyone know anyone else exists. And we're saying, no, we're going to be open and honest and throw that out there. So transparency. Number two is collaboration, and the collaborative piece says that's the mindset of it, right? So we're going to work collaboratively with others to achieve the outcome objective that everyone has. So and it's understanding that and working well together, but it's about, that's the mindset and that's the cognitive piece of this. We're strategically working together to have the good outcome. And then the cooperative piece is how we treat each other. So while collaboration is the cognitive piece, how we think together, cooperative, it means that we're going to play well in the sandbox together, even if my competitors are on the call or on the claim, or we're going to still act in a professional and meaningful way to, again, move it from point A to point B. And I even do that when I'm brought into court or if I'm an expert witness on claims or whatever. It's always about trans-collaborative. And so that's kind of the underlying principle in our CHAMP program, in the David Corey Company program. We have a big program that we're using now that we've been developing called HARP, which is our Housing Assessment and Relocation Program. That's a big deal. That's probably the fastest growing part of our business is that, and that's about helping locating housing for people that don't have housing, and then modifying if it needs to be modified. And that's a big deal in workers' comp.
It's not, I really feel, Corey, I've been kind of keeping an eye on you. I've been in this industry since 2006, and I don't know, I don't really remember when I heard of you, but I've kind of been keeping an eye on you and what you've been doing. But you really, you've really grown and you've really flourished over the years. And I think it's, this trans-collaborative, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, trans-collaborative, but it's okay. Collaborative. Yeah, good luck figuring that out.
Thank you. Well, I just feel like you're changing the industry. You really are. You're one of the leaders, and I think you're an ethical leader, and that's what it really takes to make changes that really benefit not only the insurance companies but the end users as well, but also helps empower them, helping them.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you one thing though, it's hard. It's like if you ever read the Road Less Traveled, that book is amazing too. But there's points in time where it's exhausting because you're the David and Goliath, and you're standing there with a small stone, and you got a giant in front of you, and the industry is huge, and it's it's controlled by behemoth hundreds of millions of dollars for companies that you know, drive and drive and drive. It's all about the bottom dollar, and it's hide everything, giant markups, and it's just it's not fraud, but it's just so unethical in my personal opinion. But I got to tell you, there are times when after our conference where we've pushed it so hard, and there are times after all these additional things, like even the champ program, I could have made a lot more money, been a lot more comfortable, had a lot less stress, if I had just done my home mod practice. But when I saw the need of contractors wanting to know, have more business, and they're frustrated that they can't get in, and then I looked at the culture and I thought, is it worth it? And all the exhaustion, and there are some days I wake up and go, no, I just need to do my home mods. But there's that other piece that says, yeah, it is worth it at the end of the day. And so I'm sitting at my desk right now. I've got on my office wall across from me. It's a whiteboard it's 8 feet wide by 4 feet tall, and that's the way my brain works. And on it, after I was pretty exhausted a few months back, and I was thinking about the conference and how we're building that, and that it's been really a challenge, but the momentum is building there, and there's a lot of excitement. But at the same time, it's exhausting, and you can only have so many hours in a day. And I
Yeah.
wrote these four things on my whiteboard that I'm actually reading off. One of them says obsessive focus. Number two is purposeful, directed thoughts. Number three is it is worth it. And number four is what is gained. And when I'm hit with those various days where I'm exhausted and I'm trying to balance many things on both sides, and I'm looking at where I believe we can go and where we should go, but do I have the mental capacity and the energy anymore to do it? I come back to that and I tell myself the only way it's going to succeed is with obsessive focus. And then I do believe that with purposeful directive thoughts, I can, because I tend to chase rabbits or squirrels or whatever you're chasing. But at the end of the day, I think it is worth it. And what's gained is, if nothing else, if I can put different thoughts into people, if I can help them to understand there is a better way or a different way to get better results, then I think we've done a really good thing, not just for us, but I believe ultimately at the end of the day, the injured worker has a better outcome because we're helping to establish some different things in the way things are done. That's so important to me. Anyone who knows me, that it's, there's a business, excuse me, a business side, but when it comes down to it, the history of how I got even interested. I did Special Olympics in college. I was playing college football at Azusa Pacific University for a couple of years, and while I was there, I got involved with Special Olympics, and I was volunteering at a residential facility for kids with disabilities. And there's a guy named Roy. There's great stories, but that's what really pushed me in my life. And I imagine therapists that are listening to this are gonna, there's something in your life. There's that point where you said, "This is what I want to do and why I want to do it," and then we get into things and we get into the way things are done. And I tend to think that the majority of us are compliant, and we do what we may complain and we may not like the way things are done, but we just do them. And I'm never been one of those that has been just that felt okay that way. So I've been a little bit of a rebel in many ways, but I would encourage anyone who's not just in home mods, but actually anything you do in your life, to be passionate about it. And if you feel that there's a better way, don't hesitate talking about it, and considering it. And I think this whole alliance that you have going on is a great platform to be able to share those things and create ideas, and be cooperative and collaborative with each other. I imagine, Karen, that the people who are involved in this, in some ways, and in some areas, are competitors. But I
Oh,
believe that they're. Go ahead.
No, they are. And it's one thing I've run into, are we competitors or are we friends? And it's just like, there's enough for
I'd say
everybody.
yes and yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we are, and we are. It's by the way, it's taken me many years to get to that point. Again, when you say giving away the farm, just the fact that I'm having this conversation with you and telling people about an industry that I think is a wonderful place to work. There's a lot of challenges, and I'm teaching other therapists how to get involved with it. Not only am I teaching them, I'm inviting them to be a part of the Champ Connect program and have a profile and um, let me help you put your name out there. It helps me. It helps you. I, I think I'm at a point. I'm 57 years old, and I'm at a point where I'm like, you know what? I really want the legacy, not me personally, but of the what we've done in the industry, to be much broader and much. I would love to have we don't call it Champ Connect a network; it's a community, and having a community of 50 really good accessibility specialists who understand the market, who can go into it and actually do things trans cooperatively, who get that. We're trying to get companies that have a history of hidden markups and all these other things to consider a cultural paradigm shift to go different directions. And I've got so many that are interested. I just don't have too many that have pulled the trigger. I have employees of those companies who one I'm actually meeting with today who said I want to come work for you because I keep going up to the food chain and they keep pushing me back down and that's exhausting. And I said, don't stop. I said, it's
Yeah.
sooner or later. Yeah, sooner or later. Hmm.
Well, there's just so much to all of it. But
There is.
the beauty I see also of what you're doing is not only are you helping to make the home mods move more smoothly and more ethically, which hopefully you won't end, I'm sure you've seen it as I've seen it where, you make these recommendations for someone who's catastrophically injured. They just want to be able to live their life and
Yeah.
have a home, but then it gets all caught up in all these different arguments and you know
Hmm.
you're streamlining it so everyone can do their part of the puzzle, because the only way it's going to work and the only way home mods really turn out beautifully is if everyone works together. Everybody has something they're good at, whether it's the OT doing the evaluation and seeing how the disability works, the builder how they construct the
Yeah.
the case manager who pulls it all together and helps coordinate everything, and of course the insurance company as well. I mean, it all has to come together, and when it doesn't, it's just so painful for everyone, and the client gets stuck in the middle. It's just so, I mean, it's perfect. The other thing is I think I'm hoping as well that this will help the occupational therapy profession, because that's one thing where you know we need some help in that end as well, as far as people understanding what we do and how we do play on the team.
Do you find that, and this is just a personal opinion, I find that the OT profession gets so focused on the whole aging in place that they neglect a lot of the other opportunities that therapists have to be involved in other avenues and creative avenues within workers' comp. It seems like the focus is all on fall prevention and more like universal design principles and the more global aging in place. And we don't spend enough time helping therapists understand the other opportunities like auto liability, um, even I guess to VA to an extent in some other areas as well. But certainly my niche is it's been a great opportunity for us, and I imagine it could be for several others as well.
No, I agree. That's one thing. I mean, the reason I started the Home Modification Occupational Therapy Alliance was because I had my own business. I was working predominantly in the auto no fault injury, a little bit of medical malpractice, a little bit of workman's comp. Um, but I felt like, I'd go to AOTA expecting to meet all these other home mod OTs, and I really wasn't meeting them. And
Mm.
so, part of this is also to help, the home mod OT industry is not going to grow unless we have OTs that understand, there's not just aging in place. There's more to
Uh,
it. Get some education on this.
do you find that what I find is that when I meet an OT or because I'm not as involved with the industry as far as rehab is concerned, as far as AOTA and all those things. But what I find is when I meet an OT, they think it's the greatest thing in the world. Oh, that's so cool! You're able to apply what you did in school and your degree and your license and all these other avenues. And are really they think it's really cool, but none of them, very few actually uh, take the leap, and they want to, but there's not the ability to, or the know-how to, or the fear factor of how do I actually get it started. And it seems to me it's more of the how do I build the business and how I get into business than it is about being a therapist. Would you find that as well, where people think it's God, this is really exciting, but yeah, that'd be so cool to do, but
Oh, yeah. Most of the people in HMOTA has started out like that. A lot of them have taken the leap, and the ones that have are so excited about it. They talk
yeah,
about, oh, it's easy, but what I'm finding, because I'm starting to get more national contracts, people are starting to call HMOTA more for anything from
well,
aging
good,
in place to, attorneys.
yep.
Like I said, we're we workman's comp here and there, but I'm starting to get more business throughout the United States. But the problem I'm having is, getting, I don't always have home motto teas everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, part of it for me is we need to get more people who are, like you said, understand this. But, that's one nice thing of Champs is, surfacing as a leader, because we need,
Well,
we need, need you. We need you,
I
Corey.
well, we need you to. So that what I would say is that it's and here's I guess it's been my dilemma too. Um, it's 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 not just finding a therapist or an accessibility specialist; it's finding the right ones. When you're putting your name on it, like if I'm putting the David Corey's name on it, the carriers have come with an expectation that it's going to be done certain ways, and it's going to be done from a systems perspective and from a professionalism perspective, all these things. So even though I found therapists that were really interested, I didn't find a whole lot that were committed to. And my brother used to always say, yeah, one of the statements he always says is uh, the don't ever mistake enthusiasm for ability. And there's a lot of people who are enthusiastic about it, but don't necessarily have the training or ability in your particular niche. So my bigger problem has been finding people and therapists that I felt um, who had the ability or the knowledge within our industry. They may be able to do it fine on a like consumer direct where you're working with someone personally in their home, but then certainly, in my world, it was hard finding people that and good therapists that fully could become engaged in the niche of workers' comp. So uh, we have kind of a mentoring program where we're working with a therapist in Texas right now who I'm actually really excited about. She's doing a great job for us, and she went out on a couple of jobs with me, and we kind of walked through the process. She's gone through our training. She just finished her first full-blown assessment. They flew her from Austin, Texas area out to Montana and put her up in a hotel overnight, let her do her assessment, and we came back and she finished. She just finished up her first one and did a beautiful job. So it's taken a little while to get her to that point, but once she's there, she's going to be. I believe she'll be an industry leader at some point. Um, she's young. She actually was a COTA when she started. She's been going through, I guess, an enterprise system or something where she's working to get her OTR as well. So it's it's a pretty interesting way to do it. But it's a longer haul. But to me, in a way, it ends up the product ends up being a little more controlled and a little more quality. I just don't want us, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling here, but it's also a challenge. You know, you're comp is a huge market in a small world, and and you're given a couple of opportunities. And if you don't capitalize on it, you probably aren't going to get other opportunities. If you go in there and you do a great job, word gets around, and word gets around pretty quickly, good or bad. So you want to walk in, you want to make sure that if you're starting, that you get yourself tied at the hip with someone who can be a mentor, who's been there and done that and can coach you. That doesn't. And look, I didn't have that. I just literally, I even had at one point in the first year I did it, I was so broke, and as I said, I started in my parents' laundry room. I felt that there was a model, but I was like, do you pay your bills? Do you take care? And I had a car repossessed. I thought I was going to lose my house, and it all worked out. Those are many years behind, and I'm not worried about that anymore. But it's certainly it took me years to figure out comfortably where I was able to build a reputation of actually understanding the market. So you can understand mods, but I think the key to any success is really from a business perspective is understanding the markets that you're serving. And when you're in a workers' comp world, your client is the insurance company. The person who benefits from the work is the injured worker. They're the beneficiary. But the client, and you need to know your client well, is ultimately a self-insured employer or an insurance company or a third-party administrator. And so it's very, very important that you understand that balance. It is about the injured worker, but your client is the carrier. You got to know your business in order to be successful in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Corey, thank you. And I've been doing home mods since 2006. I'm just getting into the workman's comp world, and I'll tell you what,
Sure.
I'm planning on taking your champs course because it's different than auto, and I really thought it was just auto with a workman's comp hat on. But
Oh, God. I'm
but
glad it's not, actually. I'm glad it's not. Auto's scary. But no, come anytime. Yeah, we'll put you out in front and let you have a conversation. You know what? It's interesting. As the CHAMP program continues to develop, it would be cool to be able to help them understand other opportunities they have as well. So from a construction perspective, so maybe you need to be teaching part of the course with me on it. So we'll talk about that at a later date.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I want to wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time. We may have to ask you to come talk to our group. We meet online every other Monday. Just have you come
anytime you want me to. Happy to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Corey. I really appreciate it.
No worries. You have yourself a great day. Happy holidays as well.
Can you stay online though, because I would like to talk to you about some other things.
Sure. No problem, Karen.